Get out!
Revenge Files with Nora. File 23. Monica. $2.3 million. My department head had transferred that much money over nearly 4 years through fake vendor accounts, and I was the one who found it, buried in a budget reconciliation report that no one bothered to read twice. The federal investigation lasted 11 months. 17 people were questioned. When the SEC finally released its findings, my department head wasn't just fired. He also faced criminal charges. This is the story of how I uncovered a fraud that was hidden in plain sight, protected by silence, enabled by trust, and ultimately exposed by documents. Here's what happened. My name is Monica Hartley. I worked for 7 years at a consulting firm on the 31st floor of a building in Murray Hill, spending the last 5 years as a senior financial analyst. I thought my job was to track expenses and flag irregularities. Turns out, my real job was to stay silent and look the other way. But I couldn't. When the numbers were telling a story that no one wanted to hear, I couldn't do it. I joined Aldrich Partners right out of grad school, a boutique consulting firm with a reputation for discretion and a client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies. The office sat on the 31st floor of a glass tower in Murray Hill, the kind of place where the coffee was always fresh and the conversations were always careful. I started as a junior analyst, crunching numbers in a windowless room with fluorescent lights that hummed just slightly off-key, but I was good at what I did. Within 2 years, I had been promoted to senior financial analyst. My job was to review expense reports, reconcile vendor payments, and flag anything that looked unusual. Most days, nothing did. The numbers lined up. The invoices matched. The world made sense. But the world I knew was about to change completely. My division head was a man named Raymond Callister, tall, silver-haired, with a voice that filled conference rooms without ever seeming to rise. He had been with Aldrich for 19 years. He knew every client by name, every partner by preference, and every shortcut through the bureaucracy. People trusted him. I trusted him. He was the one who approved my promotion. He was the one who told me during my first performance review that I had a future at the firm. Raymond had a way of making you feel seen. He remembered birthdays. He asked about your family. He sent handwritten notes when you closed a difficult account. The kind of gestures that seem small until you realize how rare they are in a place where most people barely remember your name. The finance department operated on the 29th floor, 2 levels below Raymond's corner office. We rarely interacted directly. Most of our communication happened through emails and quarterly reports. But every few months, Raymond would stop by unannounced, coffee in hand, asking how things were going. He called it staying connected. I called it thoughtful. That was before I understood what he was really checking on. The first anomaly appeared in March, 6 months before everything unraveled. I was reviewing a batch of vendor payments for a client engagement in the Midwest. Standard procedure. Most of the invoices came from companies I recognized: consulting subcontractors, software licenses, travel reimbursements. But one invoice caught my attention. It was from a company called Whitmore Technical Solutions. The amount was $47,000. The description read simply, Technical Consulting Services. I had never heard of Whitmore Technical Solutions. That wasn't unusual by itself. We worked with hundreds of vendors. But something about the invoice felt off. The formatting was slightly different. The address listed was a P.O. box in Delaware, and the payment had been approved directly by Raymond, bypassing the standard 2-signature protocol. I flagged it for follow-up, not as a formal complaint, just a note in my tracking spreadsheet, a yellow highlight that meant I want to look at this again. 2 weeks later, another invoice appeared, same company, same vague description. This time, $62,000. Again, approved by Raymond. I pulled the vendor registration file. Whitmore Technical Solutions had been added to our system 18 months earlier. The registration form listed Raymond as the primary contact. That detail sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. I told myself it was probably nothing. Raymond oversaw dozens of client accounts. It made sense that he would be the contact for certain vendors. But the stone didn't move. It all started with these small suspicions. I started keeping a separate file, not on the company server, on a flash drive I carried in my bag. I also created a Proton Mail account, separate from my work email, where I forwarded key documents to myself with timestamps that couldn't be altered. Every invoice from Whitmore Technical Solutions, every payment approval, every email chain that mentioned the company. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew that the numbers weren't telling the whole story. I think I was hoping to find a logical explanation and return to my old world. In my line of work, numbers always tell a story. You just have to know how to listen. And by June, it had become impossible to ignore what this story was saying. Whitmore Technical Solutions had received payments totaling $340,000 in the first half of the year alone, all approved by Raymond, all with the same vague description, none of them tied to any deliverable I could find in our project management system. I searched for contracts. There were none. I searched for work orders. Nothing. I searched for any evidence that Whitmore Technical Solutions had actually provided services to Aldrich Partners. I found silence. I had no idea how to proceed from here. That was when I made a decision that would change everything. I requested a meeting with our compliance officer, Patricia Okonkwo. Patricia had been with the firm for 12 years. She was known for her thoroughness and her discretion. If anyone could help me understand what I was seeing, it was her. We met in a small conference room on the 28th floor. I brought my flash drive. She brought a legal pad and a pen that she never used. I showed her the invoices, the payment approvals, the missing contracts. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "How long have you been tracking this?" she asked. 3 months, I said. "Does anyone else know?" "No." She nodded slowly. "Keep it that way." Patricia didn't promise me anything that day. She didn't tell me I was right or wrong. She just asked me to continue documenting every invoice, every approval, every date and dollar amount. "Build the audit trail," she said. "Let the numbers do the talking." I left that meeting feeling something I hadn't expected. Not relief. Not validation. Unease, even fear. Because Patricia's reaction told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a clerical error. This wasn't an oversight. This was something that required careful handling. And careful handling meant someone was going to get hurt. The weeks that followed felt like walking through fog. I went to work. I smiled at colleagues. I attended meetings and nodded at the right moments. But underneath, accompanied by my unease, I was counting invoices, payments, the growing total that would eventually reach $2.3 million. I started arriving early and staying late. Not because I had to, because I needed the quiet. The empty office gave me space to think without worrying about who might be watching. Raymond continued his visits to the finance floor. Same coffee, same warm smile, same questions about how things were going. But now, those visits felt different. I found myself studying his face for cracks. Searching for some sign that he knew I was looking. He never gave one. Either he was innocent, or he was very good at this. What I had seen recently taught me it was the latter. One afternoon, he stopped by my desk while I was reviewing the monthly reconciliation report. "Good work on the Patterson account," he said. "The client was impressed." "Thank you," I replied. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too bright, too controlled. He lingered for a moment longer than usual. "You know," he said, leaning against the partition, "you remind me of myself when I started here. Hungry. Thorough. The kind of person who notices things other people miss." I forced a smile. "Thank you." He nodded and walked away. I watched him disappear around the corner and felt something cold settle in my stomach. He wasn't complimenting me. He was testing me. I needed to better protect the information I had in myself. Things were quickly heading toward a serious point. That night, I made a copy of everything on my flash drive, one backup at home, one in a safety deposit box I had rented a week earlier. Patricia had taught me something important without saying it directly. Documentation isn't just about accuracy, it's about survival. The budget reconciliation meeting happened on a Thursday in late September. Conference room 31B, 12 people around a table designed for 8. I was there to present the quarterly expense summary. Raymond was there because he never missed a meeting where numbers were discussed. The first 40 minutes went smoothly. Revenue projections, client retention rates, nothing controversial. Then we reached the vendor expense section. I had prepared 2 versions of my presentation. The official version showed aggregate totals by category. Clean. Simple. The version I kept on my flash drive showed something else entirely. The version I didn't want Raymond to see. I clicked to the next slide. Our consulting subcontractor expenses increased by 18% this quarter, I said. Most of that growth came from specialized technical services. Raymond nodded along with everyone else. Nothing unusual there, he said. We've been scaling up for the Henderson project. I let the moment pass. He was right, of course. From the outside, the numbers looked perfectly reasonable. That was the genius of what he had built. The fraud was designed to look like normal business operations, unless you knew exactly where to look. After the meeting, Patricia caught my eye in the hallway. Her office, she mouthed. I followed her 3 minutes later, taking the stairs to avoid being seen in the elevator together. She closed the door behind me and didn't sit down. She looked tense. I've been doing some research, she said. Whitmore Technical Solutions is registered in Delaware. Single-member LLC. The registered agent is a law firm in Wilmington that specializes in anonymous corporate structures. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? It means someone went to a lot of trouble to hide who owns that company. She paused. The kind of trouble that suggests they knew someone might eventually come looking. I needed to dig deeper. But I could no longer risk working at the office. If Raymond stopped by my room again, I might leave something exposed. From now on, I would research at home after work. Late at night, with the curtains drawn and my laptop connected to a VPN I had set up specifically for this purpose, I found 3 more shell companies linked to Aldrich accounts: Cornerstone Advisory Group, Keystone Business Solutions, Westfield Analytics, all registered in Delaware, all receiving payments approved by Raymond, all providing services that left no trace in our project management system. The total had grown beyond what I had initially calculated. When I added everything together, I froze at the number staring back at me. $2.3 million. Paid to companies that existed only on paper, for services that were never delivered. The evidence was now undeniable. This wasn't creative accounting. This wasn't aggressive expense management. This was embezzlement. Plain and simple. Raymond Callister had been stealing from the company for nearly 4 years, hiding the theft behind a network of fake vendors and fraudulent invoices. And I was the only person outside of Patricia who knew. I called her on a Saturday morning. "We need to talk," I said. Not at the office. We met at a coffee shop in Chelsea, far enough from Murray Hill that we wouldn't run into anyone from work. I showed her my findings on my phone, the shell companies, the payment patterns, the total amount. She listened without interrupting, her coffee growing cold in front of her. When I finished, she looked at me with something I hadn't seen before. Respect mixed with concern. "You understand what this means," she said. "It means we have to report it." She shook her head slowly. "It means we have to decide who to report it to." Patricia explained the options. We could go to the managing partners, the people who ran Aldrich and who had worked alongside Raymond for 2 decades. We could go to the board of directors, a group of external advisors who met quarterly and rarely interfered with operations, or we could go outside the company entirely, to the Securities and Exchange Commission, to federal regulators who had the authority to investigate financial crimes. Each option carried different risks. Going internal meant trusting people who might choose to protect Raymond over the truth. Going external meant exposing the company to regulatory scrutiny that could damage its reputation permanently. There was no safe path, only different kinds of danger. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in my head. What if the partners already knew? What if they were complicit? What if reporting this destroyed my career and nothing happened to Raymond? Each possibility was more terrifying than the last. You know how exhausting this kind of dilemma is. The questions circle around you like sharks. By morning, I was exhausted from thinking through the possibilities. I had to choose the path with the most guaranteed outcome, and I made my decision. "We go to the SEC," I told Patricia. She nodded once. "Then we do this by the book. Every step documented, every communication in writing. We build a case they can't ignore." The SEC whistleblower program had been established years earlier to encourage exactly this kind of reporting. I learned that from their website at 3 a.m., reading through pages of legal language that blurred together after a while. The program offered financial incentives for reporting securities violations. More importantly, it offered protection. Retaliation against whistleblowers was illegal. That protection felt necessary because I knew that once I filed that complaint, there was no going back. Raymond would eventually find out, and Raymond, I had learned, was not a man who forgave easily. He was also far too clever. Patricia connected me with a lawyer, a woman named Diane Chen who specialized in whistleblower cases. We met at her office in Tribeca on a Wednesday evening after work. I brought my flash drive, my backups, my spreadsheets with timestamps and payment records. Diane reviewed everything for 3 hours without saying much. When she finally looked up, her expression was calm but serious. "You have a strong case," she said, "but I need you to understand something. Filing a complaint with the SEC is not like filing a complaint with HR. Once this process begins, it will take on a life of its own. Investigations, depositions, possibly a federal case. A federal case that could take a long time. Are you prepared for that?" For a moment, I thought about what I would do if things went wrong. Everything I had worked for could disappear. I thought about the career I had spent years building. My apartment in Astoria. My mother and sister, whom I hadn't told anything to avoid worrying them and who were unaware of all that was happening. Despite everything, there was no turning back from this. I thought about the numbers. $2.3 million. Money stolen from a company that trusted Raymond with its finances, stolen from clients who paid for services they never received. I looked at Diane and said the only thing I could. I'm prepared. The complaint was filed on a Friday afternoon in October. 47 pages of documentation. Bank records, invoice histories, payment approvals with Raymond's digital signature. The shell company registrations. Everything I had collected over 7 months, organized and annotated and cross-referenced. Diane had helped me structure it so that each piece of evidence supported the next. A chain of fraud that started with a single suspicious invoice and ended with a criminal enterprise worth millions. The SEC acknowledged receipt within 48 hours. A form letter, nothing personal, but it meant the process had officially begun. I saved the acknowledgement email in 3 different places. Evidence of evidence. That's what Diane called it. Proof that I had done everything by the book. Back at the office, nothing changed, at least not on the surface. I continued reviewing expense reports. I continued attending meetings. I continued smiling at Raymond when he stopped by the finance floor, but something had shifted inside me. The fear was still there, but getting support made me feel stronger, and my goal was now clear and I was determined. Every time Raymond looked at me, I reminded myself of what I knew. Every time he praised my work, I heard the calculation behind his words. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 weeks later. I arrived at my desk on a Monday morning to find an email from Human Resources. Subject line: schedule adjustment. The message informed me that my access to certain financial systems would be temporarily restricted due to a routine security audit. Nothing personal, the email assured me. Just standard procedure. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Diane with a single question mark. She called me back within an hour. "Don't react," she said. "Don't ask questions. Just document everything. If they're restricting your access, it might mean nothing. Or it might mean someone knows you've been looking at things you shouldn't." I asked the obvious question. "What do I do?" "You wait," she replied, "and you keep copies of everything." Raymond's behavior changed after that. The friendly visits stopped. The warm smiles became brief nods. Once I caught him watching me from across the floor, his expression unreadable. When our eyes met, he looked away first. My skin crawled. He was suspicious. Maybe not certain, but suspicious enough to be careful. The question was whether he would act before the SEC did. At this point, I realized I hadn't prepared for what to do. Diane's question about whether I was ready took on new meaning, or had I embarked on something I wasn't ready for. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I found out. Patricia called me into her office and closed the door. Her face told me everything I needed to know before she said a word. "They're restructuring your department," she said. "Your position is being eliminated." I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. "When?" "Mid-December," she replied. "They're offering a severance package. 2 months' salary." I stared at her. "Is this because of the complaint?" She didn't answer directly. "I can't prove anything," she said, but the timing is suspicious. I'm documenting everything I can." Diane's response was immediate. "This is retaliation," she said. "They can't fire you for filing a whistleblower complaint." I laughed bitterly. "They're not firing me for filing a complaint. They're eliminating my position due to restructuring. Completely different on paper." "Paper doesn't matter," she replied. "Timing does, and we have the timeline." Raymond, whether he knew it or not, was making his own situation worse by firing me. She filed an addendum to our SEC complaint that same day, a detailed account of the access restrictions, the schedule changes, and now the termination. All documented with dates and emails. The original fraud case had just become a retaliation case as well. My last day at Aldrich Partners was December 15th. I cleaned out my desk while my former colleagues avoided eye contact. Some of them knew something was wrong. Others probably assumed I had simply been let go during a budget cut. No one asked questions. That was the culture Raymond had built. Don't look too closely. Don't ask too many questions, and whatever you do, don't make waves. I walked out of the building at 4:37 p.m. The security guard nodded as I passed. I didn't look back. The flash drive in my bag held everything I needed. 7 months of documentation, hundreds of pages of evidence, and the knowledge that somewhere in a government office, investigators were starting to ask the same questions I had asked months before. The call from the SEC came in February. A man named Thomas Wheeler introduced himself as a senior enforcement attorney. "MTKS Hartley," he said, "we've reviewed your submission. We'd like to schedule an interview." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Of course, I managed. "Whatever you need." The interview lasted 6 hours. Wheeler and 2 other attorneys sat across from me in a conference room in Lower Manhattan. They had questions about everything: the invoices, the shell companies, Raymond's approval process, Patricia's involvement, my own timeline of discovery. I answered every question as precisely as I could. When I didn't know something, I said so. When I had documentation, I provided it. At the end of the interview, Wheeler leaned back in his chair. "You've built a thorough case," he said. I just nodded. "What happens now?" "We investigate," he replied. "We verify your documentation independently. We interview other employees. And if your evidence holds up, we build a case for enforcement action." "How long does that take?" He smiled slightly. "Longer than you'd like. Shorter than the people we're investigating would prefer." The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I was unemployed, living off savings and the small severance package Aldrich had provided. I was struggling to keep my mother and sister from finding out I had been fired. I spent my days applying for jobs and my nights wondering if I had made the right decision. Sometimes I would wake up at 3 a.m., convinced that everything had been a mistake, that Raymond was innocent, that I had destroyed my career over nothing. Diane kept me grounded. She called every week, sometimes just to check in, sometimes with updates from the SEC. "The investigation is progressing," she would say. "They've subpoenaed bank records. They've interviewed former employees. Your documentation is holding up." Those calls were lifelines, proof that what I had done mattered, that the truth was slowly, methodically coming to light. In April, I received an email from a recruiter at a competing consulting firm, a company called Hartwell Advisory, based in Midtown. They were looking for a senior financial analyst with experience in forensic accounting. The job description mentioned compliance investigation and fraud detection. I applied that same day. The interview process took 3 weeks, 4 rounds of conversations with partners and directors. None of them asked why I had left Aldrich. The industry was small enough that rumors traveled fast. They knew I was the one who had filed the complaint, and apparently they saw that as a qualification rather than a liability. I started at Hartwell in May. This job had come to my rescue just in time. A corner office on the 22nd floor with a clear view of the Hudson River. The salary was 20% higher than what I had been making at Aldrich. The benefits were much better, and for the first time in almost a year, I felt like I could breathe. While time moved forward somehow, I was very glad to be out of the house and to have a job to distract me. Then the SEC's investigation intensified over the summer. Diane kept me informed through encrypted emails and occasional phone calls. "They've traced the shell companies," she told me in June. The registered agents are cooperating. The bank records show transfers to accounts linked to Raymond personally. In July, federal prosecutors joined the case. The fraud was large enough to warrant criminal charges, not just civil penalties. Raymond Callister wasn't just going to lose his job, he was facing the possibility of prison. I learned later that 17 people were interviewed during the investigation: accountants, project managers, former vendors, even some of the managing partners who had worked alongside Raymond for years. Most of them claimed ignorance. A few admitted they had noticed irregularities but hadn't wanted to make waves. Only Patricia and I had documented anything. Only we had been willing to connect the dots. The confrontation I had been dreading came in August. I was leaving my office at Hartwell when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered without thinking. "Monica," said a voice I recognized instantly. "Raymond." The word came out flat. "Surprised to hear from me?" he asked. "I should be," I replied. "What do you want?" He laughed softly. A sound that used to feel warm but now felt calculated. "I want to understand something," he said. "Why?" "Why what? Why destroy everything? Your career, my career, the firm's reputation. You could have come to me directly. You could have asked questions." I felt heat rise in my chest. "You know why? You know what you did, Raymond. I just did my job." "I did ask questions," I said. "The numbers asked questions. You just assumed no one was listening." A pause, then his voice hardened. "You have no idea what you've done. The damage extends far beyond me. I thought about the clients whose money had been stolen, the employees who had unknowingly participated in fraud, the trust that had been betrayed at every level." "The damage was already done," I replied. "I just documented it." He hung up without another word. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, my heart pounding. Then I forwarded the call details to Diane. "Evidence of attempted intimidation," she said when she called me back. "Add it to the file." I did. Another piece of documentation in a case that had grown far beyond anything I had imagined when I first noticed that suspicious invoice. September brought more developments. Raymond's legal team attempted to negotiate a settlement with the SEC. They proposed a fine and a voluntary resignation in exchange for dropping the criminal referral. The SEC rejected the offer. The evidence was too strong, the fraud was too systematic, and the retaliation against me had demonstrated a pattern of consciousness of guilt that prosecutors couldn't ignore. Diane called me on a Tuesday evening with news that made my hands shake. "They're issuing formal charges next week," she said. "Federal wire fraud, securities violations, obstruction of justice. He's looking at a minimum of 5 years if convicted." I sat down on my couch and tried to process what I was hearing. Raymond Callister, the man who had mentored me, the man who had approved my promotion, the man who had stolen millions while smiling at everyone around him. He was about to face consequences that would follow him for the rest of his life. I asked the question that had been haunting me for months. Was it worth it, all of this? The investigation, the job loss, the stress, was it worth it? Diane didn't answer immediately. "That depends," she finally said, "on what you hope to achieve." I thought about her question long after we hung up. I hadn't filed that complaint hoping for revenge. I hadn't done it for money or recognition or some sense of personal justice. I had done it because the numbers told a story that demanded to be heard, and I hadn't ignored that story. The federal indictment was announced on a Thursday morning in October, 11 months after I had filed my initial complaint. I watched the news coverage from my office at Hartwell. The door closed, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. "Raymond Callister, division head at Aldrich Partners, has been charged with federal wire fraud and securities violations," the anchor said. Prosecutors allege he embezzled over $2.3 million through a network of shell companies over a period of nearly 4 years. They showed his photograph. It was as if I was looking at a man I had never known. The arraignment happened the following week. Raymond pleaded not guilty, as his lawyers had surely advised. The trial was scheduled for the spring. In the meantime, he was released on bail, his passport surrendered, his bank accounts frozen pending the outcome of the case. Aldrich Partners issued a statement expressing shock and disappointment. They promised full cooperation with federal authorities. I was relieved they made no mention of my name. Patricia called me that evening. She had been promoted to chief compliance officer in the wake of the scandal. A role created specifically to prevent anything like this from happening again. I always knew you had integrity, she said. I just didn't know how much it would cost you. I thought about the months of uncertainty, the sleepless nights. The moment I had walked out of that building for the last time, despite everything, I couldn't have stayed silent, I replied. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified on the second day. Wheeler had prepared me for the experience, but nothing could have made it easy. Raymond's defense attorney tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, someone who had invented a conspiracy to explain her own professional failures. I answered every question calmly. I referred to my documentation. I let the evidence speak for itself. When the cross-examination ended, I walked out of the courtroom feeling lighter than I had in years. The jury deliberated for 2 days, guilty on all counts. I was at my desk when the news broke. My phone buzzed with messages from Diane, from Patricia, from colleagues at Hartwell who had followed the case. Raymond Callister was facing a recommended sentence of 7 to 12 years in federal prison. His assets would be seized to compensate the company and its clients. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. And somewhere in a federal courthouse, the numbers had finally told their complete story. The sentencing hearing happened in June. I didn't attend. I think I was avoiding coming face to face with Raymond. Diane sent me a text when it was over. 8 years federal custody, she wrote, plus full restitution and a lifetime ban from the securities industry. Raymond Callister would spend the next 8 years in a federal prison, thinking about the invoices that had finally caught up with him. I stared at my phone for a long moment. Then I put it down and went back to work. I had to continue my life where I had left off. The SEC whistleblower reward arrived 3 months later, a percentage of the penalties collected, more money than I had ever seen in one place. I spent some of it to support my mother and sister. The rest went into savings. I didn't feel like celebrating. The money wasn't the point. It never had been. Today, I'm still at Hartwell Advisory. I was promoted to Director of Financial Compliance last year. My team reviews every vendor payment, every expense report, every invoice that crosses our system. I've built protocols based on everything I learned during those months at Aldrich. Patricia and I still meet for coffee occasionally. She runs the compliance department at Aldrich now, rebuilding trust that Raymond spent years destroying. The firm survived the scandal, but it will never fully recover. Raymond is serving his sentence at a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. Both of his appeals were denied. He'll be eligible for parole in 5 years. I learned something from this experience that I carry with me every day. Everyone who noticed something was wrong and said nothing made Raymond's fraud possible. Speaking up is difficult, but staying silent has costs that compound over time. It was hard, but I paid that price and was able to move on with my life this way. Otherwise, I would have continued living with this truth every day in my office at Aldrich Partners. Do you agree? Share your thoughts in the comments. The full Purple File playlist's waiting, or discover other color files for more office revenge. See you in the next file.